There has been a great rise in people searching online for options to do a will or update a will. Are you one of those people? Stick around for a few minutes and we'll talk about the formalities of a will and your options. Hi, I'm Alex from Contrast Law. Thanks for joining and watching the video. So many people have been calling lawyers' offices, and many estate planning lawyers are really busy right now answering questions potentially regarding existing documents or what can people do to get something in place because they have not done a will or have not updated the will in many years. In Manitoba, there are no choices for electronic execution of wills. There is a case to be heard in Ontario on an urgent basis next week. I believe it's scheduled for next week, where it will be viewed or considered by the court if a remote execution, essentially without a lawyer being present or witnesses being present in the same room and following the formalities that is usually required, and whether that's going to be a valid will. So the court has agreed to hear that case on an urgent basis, but we don't know what the outcome will be. And as of today in Manitoba, the rules are still very clear that no electronic execution is allowed, and you still have to follow the formalities. So I just want to reiterate what are the formalities in Manitoba so that everybody knows, and hopefully you can find a solution. So the two forms of wills is a holograph will or a formal will. So a formal will is what is usually done by a lawyer in most circumstances. And so that's a will in writing witnessed by two individuals. So sometimes people misunderstand the requirement for two witnesses. And that's the requirement. All individuals, so the person executing the will and the witnesses must be in the same room at the same time, and they cannot leave. So a person cannot sign a will and then send it by courier or mail it or walk it over to a neighbor and then get that individual to witness it and act as one of the witnesses. So all three individuals must be in the same room together at the same time. So the second form of a will is a holograph will, and it must be entirely in your own handwriting and signed. So if the whole thing is in your own handwriting, printed, is not allowed. So it has to be in the whole thing in your own handwriting, dated and signed at the end, then it will be a holograph will. So if you're considering doing a will in a holograph form, here's some basics that you should at least consider for your will. So obviously the contents will depend on your wishes and your personal circumstances, but at a minimum, you should address appointment of an executor. And is it one person or more than one person? If you're appointing more than one individual, consider where the person being appointed is living. Obviously, if they're living out of the province, there are logistics issues. You certainly do not want to appoint somebody who's not living in Canada. It presents its own challenges. You want to address that all the debts and expenses are to be paid out of your estate. If you have special personal items that you want to distribute to certain individuals, make notes on that. If you're providing for any specific gifts, such as specific amount to a charity or a friend, you can note that. And then the residual clause. So the residue is basically anything that's not otherwise specifically addressed in the will. So you can make a note that anything that's not otherwise gifted or the residue of your estate is to be distributed in a specific manner. If there's minor children involved, you want to address who you would like to appoint as a guardian for those children or guardians. In Manitoba, that's not the final say, and at the end of the day, the guardianship still has to be approved by the court, but it certainly will be taken into account on that guardianship application if you had instructions in your will on that. The trusts, that's again relating, if you have minor children especially, at which age should those children receive the funds? If you happen to pass away before the kids attain the age of majority. Do they get it at 18? Do they get it at age 21 or some other age? Although unlikely, but you still want to consider a common disaster scenario. So if something happens to the whole family at once, what is to happen with your estate? You still want to consider that and discuss or outline in your will how you would like those items to be distributed and the residue of your estate. Obviously, there might be other personal circumstances or considerations, but those at least are some of the points that you need to be considering. So coming back to my comment on two witnesses, you have to follow the execution basics. So you must have proper execution. Obviously, if it's holograph will, the whole thing in your own handwriting, as long as it's dated and signed, that will be valid. If it is a formal will, and that correlates to the last point on the slide, if it's a pre-printed form or something that you found online or used one of the online services, that's not a holograph will. So if you fill it out, you print it, and you sign it and date it at the end, that's not a formal will because it does not follow the rules for two witnesses. So in Manitoba, we do have a special section in the Wills Act that will allow potentially a court to fix the problem, but that obviously requires a court application and obviously will involve expenses in your estate. But I mean, that's an ability, but we don't want to rely on that if we don't have to. So the person obviously signing must have capacity, and if you're watching this, I suspect you have capacity. And the will must be in writing and physically signed. And again, that comes back to my point that in Manitoba, we don't have an exception of any kind for electronic signing, something being signed with a digital signature or electronic signature, or an image of a signature being inserted on an electronic document and then being printed. So if you're in self-isolation and you still want to make a will, and maybe this is an interim solution, I certainly do not encourage or suggest that this is a long-term solution, but I suppose you could consider going online, going through one of the pre-printed forms or online services and looking through their system, going through the questionnaire, printing it out. But because you still want to follow the proper execution, actually taking that document and then transcribing or rewriting your wishes essentially into a holograph form. So that way, perhaps that system will guide you, at least in some respects, to use somewhat proper wording. And that's not a foolproof system, but at least it's something. But at the same time, you'll have a proper holograph will that may be enforceable at the end of the day. So again, I don't suggest that as a long-term solution. This is only in the circumstances where you're in self-isolation, you cannot go and see other people, but you're absolutely adamant that something needs to be done today. Perhaps that is an interim solution. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. You can, if you have a question that you would like me to answer, send me an email, blog@contrastlaw.ca, or you can also reach me by phone, 204-808-4400, and hopefully I can help.